Hello everyone and welcome to another intimate conversation. I'm Anna Sansom, my pronouns are she, her, and my very special guest today is Rowan Bombadil, whose pronouns are they, them. For those of you who don't know me, I write erotica and I'm also the author of this book, Desire Lines, which is my more than a memoir, which is all about finding and following the paths of our own unique desires. And I'm really excited to have a chance to talk with Rowan today because Rowan is the author of this book, which is even bigger than mine, called Igniting Intimacy. Let me get the full title: Igniting Intimacy, Sex Magic Rituals for Radical Living and Loving. Wow. I'm endlessly curious about the topic of intimacy, erotica, desire, pleasure, all of those things. So with a title like Igniting Intimacy, I couldn't resist the opportunity to invite Rowan to talk with me today. So thank you so much for being here, Rowan. And for people who are new to you, if I could just describe you as a psychosexual coach, an interfaith minister, a queer sex witch, and of course, a writer and author. And I wonder if we could just begin by you saying a little bit about what that actually means for you to have all of those labels, all of those different hats. What does that look like for you in your daily life?
Obviously, with where we are at this point in history and in this kind of new world or new chapter that we find ourselves in, it looks a little bit different from what it used to. So I used to do things like running beautiful ritual orgies, and that doesn't happen so much anymore, certainly not at the moment. But otherwise, so yeah, I guess if I speak to the last couple of years, what that looks like is I have a psychosexual coaching practice, which is now conducted entirely online, and I work primarily with GSRD clients, so clients with gender, sexuality and relationship diversity, exploring the difficult, the big, the tender questions around love, sex, intimacy, gender, identity, spirituality, if they're thusly inclined. And as a minister, again, primarily working with GSRD clients, my big biases are commitment ceremonies, including self-commitment ceremonies. I've seen more of those in the last couple of years. That's been a real delight, sort of crafting ceremonies that actually I'm not present for and I don't facilitate. But there's something about, I think especially the first year of lockdown, that seemed to have folks, something about that time that just confronted us all with ourselves, I think. And for folks in relationships, that often meant that they were confronted with the relationship as well. But for folks who were living solo, I found quite a few people sort of reaching out to me and saying, actually, I guess something about turning towards themselves and finding a willingness and a desire and a drive to actively deepen, actively consecrate self-love, self-acceptance. So that was really beautiful. Actually, I've really enjoyed doing that, co-creating those private ceremonies with folks. And also, yes, another bias is rites of passage for gender transition as well. So those are my sort of big ministerial biases. But I find that an odd thing happens when you sort of step into the service of ministry, in that, I don't know, even in this sort of very technological world, there's still a sense of stepping into that place within one's community and one's network. And remember being surprised really right from the beginning at the sort of people who would reach out to me, looking for, even the things that weren't really on front and center on what I was offering, baby namings, funerals, these things that happen and that require our attention. And it's a privilege to sort of carve out that time and space with people to allow for those moments of, yes, this is happening. So yeah, that's that piece. And then as a writer, at the moment, that looks like finding any time that I can to wrestle with quite an audacious project that sort of tapped me on my shoulder in the last couple of years. And so yes, I'm courting that new book, as I think of it. So I think those are, does that answer the question a little?
Beautifully, thank you. And it just feels to me like how valuable and how needed the things that you've just described are in the world. And I love that sort of sense that even though you don't necessarily have like a shopping list of all the services I offer, people come to you because there's an opening. There's like that sense of, here is somebody, and they feel drawn to you and your work and your ethos and your energy and all of those things. So yeah, I find that very exciting that you and your work are present in the world. And as a writer, I love that term, like courting a new book. How exciting. How exciting.
I know that you have that experience as well, right, of writing relationally, or feeling like you're writing in relationship with something. I know we've talked about that before.
Yes, and it automatically makes me think of sort of the concept of new relationship energy. And it'll be really, we'll come on to talk more about igniting intimacy, but I'm already beginning to think, so what happens with the relationship with the old book when a new book's on the horizon? But we can come on to talk about that, if that's okay with you. I call these conversations intimate conversations because increasingly what I've realized for myself is that although I write erotica and I write about desire and love and lust and passion and all those things, at the core of it, I think what particularly interests and excites me and compels me to understand more is intimacy. Like, what is intimacy? What does it look like when we actually are in intimate relationship? And that can be like intimate relationship with ourselves, as you described, people having these self-commitment ceremonies, intimate relationship with other, and then intimate relationship with community or with the planet, or whatever it might be, sort of expanding those views out. But I'm also aware that the word intimacy has a lot of connotations and a lot of preconceived associations. People use being, I was intimate with them as a euphemism for sex and all kinds of things. So I guess I'd really like to begin by asking you, what does this word intimacy actually mean to you? Good question, I know.
It is, and it feels like one of those questions where the answer just sort of, when I try to reach for it, what it looks like in my mind is, those moments in sort of science fiction films where you're going into hyperdrive and space is just like, whooshing past. That's how sort of big that question or the answer, or seeking for the answer to that question, feels to me. And perhaps that's because increasingly, I think I approach most things through what I might call a relational lens. So from a sort of intimacy perspective. So yes, whether that's the micro, right? Whether that's, okay, how do we be intimate with ourselves? How do we be in our erotic, our creative flow? And what kind of relating does it take to get there? How do we befriend maybe the layers or the parts of ourselves that feel like they sit between us and, those lovely, powerful, flowing, juicy places we'd like to be inhabiting more, right? So those kind of micro internal intimacies through to intimacy in the sense of that interconnectedness with all things, and yes, with the natural world. So David Abrams' description of perception as participation, right? How do we be intimate? How do we open ourselves, open our senses to those messy lines of kinship with all things? Yeah. So intimacy for me increasingly is everywhere, perhaps is everything. Would I go so far as to say, I don't know, intimacy is God? It's certainly an altar I have been worshipping at for most of my sort of conscious life, I think. So that's some of what comes to me in the face of that, yeah, what feels like a very big question, just because intimacy is part of because of the nature of my work, I guess, you know, perhaps for other people, intimacy is something that's compartmentalized into certain parts of their lives. But for me, intimacy is threaded through all the important parts of my life and the life-giving parts of my experience of being alive, I guess.
Wow, thank you. And I'm really pleased that you mentioned the word God right up front, because when we first met, so Rowan and I first met at an urban tantra event, and I remember you saying, yeah, I can't remember exactly what you said, but you told me that the thing that you were offering was called making love with God. And you know, that's a phrase that one doesn't forget, making love with God. And I certainly had my own reaction to that, which was a lot of curiosity. Oh, what does that? Oh, is that allowed? Oh, what does that mean? And I know that through your book and through other work you do, that this is something that you present unapologetically. Is how it comes along, but also very compassionately and considerately to help people get a sense of what that actually means to you, what God means, and why you use that word, and what it means in terms of intimacy. So could you share a little bit about that with us just now, so we can just get it out there?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, and thank you for naming that piece of yes, perhaps being unapologetic, but also being very compassionate, because I am aware that word sparks responses, reactions, different responses and reactions in each of us, which is in some ways part of why I use it. And I would say, I think two primary reasons really for using it, maybe three, perhaps three. One is I delight in reappropriating terms that have been used to shame, to should us, to make us small, and using them in contexts for pleasure, for empowerment, for embodiment, for our bigness, if you like, for our wholeness. So I really enjoy sort of reclaiming, reappropriating terms that have become associated with, yes, making us small, and incorporating them into facilitated experiences that are aimed at helping us feel big, whole, bright, ecstatic, full. Yeah, so there's that piece. There's that sort of slightly mischievous trickster piece there. And then the other piece is about, so making love with God. What do I mean by that? And I mean a number of different things, but one of the key things for me, and this brings us back to intimacy again, is about intimacy with life and intimacy with the cosmos. And I acknowledge that what I'm about to say, I acknowledge that this is really difficult. Actually, this is, or at least I perceive and experience that this is really difficult. It's really difficult right now. We have not created a particularly humane world for us to inhabit. This is a world that is rife with oppression, and existing, humaning within a capitalist culture is incredibly difficult for, I think, most of us. So just acknowledging that before I say this, but there's something about an invitation to be in relationship with life rather than in reaction to life. So something about a possibility of stepping into co-creation with whatever the God of our understanding is. And whenever I use that word, I really encourage people to be kind of spiritual adults and replace, it's just a useful little single syllable thing, and you are so welcome to replace it with whatever works for you. But yes, how do we come into a place of possibility of co-creating with some kind of loving force, or with all that is, rather than living in response, in reaction, in fear. And really where wanting to offer that comes from is from my own experience of that relationship. And that's really the third reason why I can never quite leave the God word, the G word as I call it. I can never quite leave it out, because my relationship with the goddess of my understanding, you know, is the sort of container for everything that I do, and is the container for and the what's the word I'm looking for here? I'm not even sure. It's that which facilitates my continuing existence and my existence as a creative being as well as an alive being. And also, you know, again, in the face of the world that we live in and the world that we've created, facilitates my sanity on a day-to-day basis. So that relationship as being really important, and my experience of that relationship and what that can be, being one that I want to facilitate for others, again, if they are so inclined. So this is, you know, the God piece is never something that I sort of require or you know, force on clients or participants, but if it's something that they would like to explore and experience. And you know, the thing about this work is that often that will happen regardless. You know, there's all those sweet little moments where, you know, really sweet moments where someone comes back from a meditation that has nothing to do, or nothing intentionally or explicitly to do with the divine, and will sort of open their eyes and describe an experience of having had a divine encounter. And those moments are magical. And so I guess also acknowledging that is the nature of the work, and that does happen.
Yeah, and it fits really well for me, the sense of intimacy being something more than I don't think I'm as eloquent, but when we kind of put that, let me see if I can describe this. So for me, that there's like intimacy at the core, but it sits within this almost like the core of the earth, like if we're going to use this metaphor, like, you know, that molten core of the earth, but then everything that sits around it is somehow related to spirit, God, whatever you want to call it. So I could get myself quite tied up trying to explain this, I might stop there, but I do find it fascinating that when I try to use language to describe these things, which you yourself said are like senses, feelings, inner knowings, sometimes our verbal language just fails at the description. So to have a word which can be transferable, it makes a lot of sense. And again, with the word intimacy, you know, people are going to define that and understand that through their own lens as well. So yeah, thank you for that. Thank you. And I guess, you know, let's come on to talk about igniting intimacy. You call it a playbook because it's got so many playtime, of course, the word playtime opportunities in it. So opportunities for people to actually practice experiences of, I guess we can call intimacy, eroticism, all kinds of different connecting practices. So tell me, like, what inspired you let's go back to the beginning. So it's called Igniting Intimacy, Sex Magic Rituals for Radical Living and Loving. What, first of all, inspired you to write the book, and how would you describe what it actually offers the reader? Two questions in one.
I might segue from the last question into the second half of that question, and say that yes, it is a playbook precisely because of what we were talking about, right? Because I'm always more interested in facilitating an experience than in prescribing or naming or trying to put language on what that might be. I'm much more interested in going, you know, here's the thing that I have found useful, or that I have found ecstatic, or that I have found took me in some really interesting directions. What happens for you? You know, is it useful? Would you like to take it with you when you go, so to speak? So I think the playbook piece, that is where that comes from. So yes, as you described, it's packed full of stuff, and you could probably go through it in a number of different ways. You could attempt to read it the way you would a book and just kind of absorb and then come back to bits if you felt drawn to, but you could also very much take it on as a sort of personal extended journey or workshop or course or whatever you'd like to do, and really approach it with, you know, notebook in one hand and lube in the other, and sort of see where the journey takes you. That's also, yeah, very much an option, and very much an option that I would encourage. What inspired me to write it? So this, I have a couple of confessions here. And the first confession, here we are, you've invited me to an intimate conversation. I'm so grateful and touched to be here, and maybe this is a good time to fess up about the fact that Igniting Intimacy was not my choice of title. It was a title that the publishers chose, and actually that I was quite resistant to, but I did manage to get the subtitle in there, which is more of a kind of, it does what it says on the tin kind of title. So yes, just kind of fessing up at this point that those words were not originally my own. And then the second confession, I suppose, is that really the first part of the answer to what inspired me to write it was that I really wanted to be a writer. I really wanted to be a writer. Books, to me, they sometimes, you know, sometimes I feel like I've sort of been birthed through books. They very much feel like they're in my DNA. They're present at all my big thresholds, and this kind of goes back in terms of sort of a biographical piece to the fact that my father is a bookmaker and book collector, and I grew up in a different country to the country that he was living in, and he would send me books, and that was then and still is, you know, his way of expressing love, his way of being in relationship, of being intimate. And so yeah, there's that kind of biographical piece around the preciousness of books that kind of comes in very early. And then all of my big moments of self-discovery are accompanied by books, and sometimes books that find me in quite extraordinary ways, where it really does feel like something reached out a hand and sort of went, here you go. Here's this volume that really shouldn't have reached you or found you in the location and in the time that you're in, but here it is. So if I think about you know, my sort of emergence into witchcraft and the important role that books played there, and then my discovery of alternative medicine and psychology, and, you know, very important books sort of arriving into my field of awareness that sort of set all of that off and really put me on this you know, therapeutic coaching path. And then of course there's the moment where I'm, you know, sitting up in bed reading Urban Tantra, which I'd come across because I used to listen to Hay House Radio, because I was exploring alternative therapies, and that was the main publisher at the particularly at the time, for that field. And this woman called Barbara Corellis came on and started talking about her book, and I went, oh, that might be useful with clients, for use with clients at some point. And then sitting up in bed and reading this book, and sort of that special sort of electrical feeling of knowing that happens in one's bones, and what a huge portal, what a kind of gateway drug into so many of the things that I love about my life, so many of the things that I do, so many of my most important people. Here you and I are having this conversation. So books, experiencing books as birthplaces and portals. And I suppose one way to say, what inspired me to write the book is wanting to replicate that experience for others, wanting to offer a portal. Mm-hmm. And there are moments, every now and then someone reaches out to me who it's just found them at the right time, whether they're ready to they're standing on that precipice of change, or they just haven't encountered this material before, or they haven't encountered it in a way that's presented for them, because there aren't many books in this field, right, that are written from quite such a queer perspective. Urban Tantra, of course, being the kind of very much the forerunner of that, or one of the forerunners of that. And they say, this or that exercise, wow, it's blowing my mind, it's changing things, and that's gorgeous. I mean, that really, those moments, really, that's why. That's a huge part of why.
Thank you. And I would agree. I think having a book which is accessible because of its inclusivity on this topic is a fantastic gift. And it does sort of make me think about what I said right at the beginning, what you bring and what you offer is so needed. And I still don't think there's enough opportunities for people who are gender, sexuality, relationship diverse to access these kind of discussions and these kind of topics in a way that feels safe and familiar and held and exciting and all of those things in one. So thank you for that. Thank you. And of course that makes me very curious to hear about what book number 2 is going to be about. Would you, your courtship, are you at the stage where you're happy to share a little bit about that?
Absolutely. And I would say actually probably past the courtship stage now, and in the stage of the relationship where we've had the conversation and we've decided we're making a go of it. So my main curiosity with the book that I'm writing at the moment, and again, this, just acknowledging, this does feel like an audacious project, and I'm sometimes a little sort of a little breathless with the potential scope of it, and whether will I be able to rise to that or not, right? But my main sort of question with it is, I noticed that a culture of disposability is bleeding into our relationships and how we do relationship and how we access intimacy and why. And inevitably, of course, that means that a potential for disposability bleeds into how we treat each other. And of course, we have a long history of human beings as being able to excuse disposing, dehumanizing, disposing of one another. And so, yes, noticing that now from a sort of capitalist or transactional framework, noticing that disposability bleeding into how we are intimate, and really wanting to explore what the antidotes, what the alternatives to that might be, how do we how do we create and share and enjoy and sustain the kind of intimacies that will allow us to flourish together in the ruins of capitalism, rather than what I notice is a sort of repeated, consistent fracturing. And noticing that initially on the sort of micro scale of the communities that I was in service to or trying to participate in, but right now on a very global scale, right? That sense of fracturing and division, and I don't think we can afford that right now. We have shit to do. So that is what I'm exploring or endeavoring to explore in my writing at the moment, is what are the alternatives? What are the relational alternatives to a culture of disposability?
Extraordinary. Thank you. Thank you. And I can see why being in relationship with the topic is so important then. It's kind of like as within, without, that sort of, you're in relationship
and
with the topic.
it very much feels like there was a point where it sort of came and knocked on my door, and at the time for personal reasons I was sort of like, ooh, I'm gonna need you to give me a minute. I'm gonna need you to give me a minute. And then I sort of at some point opened the door and went, okay, and then a courtship, right? A courtship unfolds, and then now I feel like, yes, we're doing this kind of stage.
Because it genuinely does make me think, it like gives me a feeling like, excited and kind of like, wow, that's an undertaking, but such an important one. And I really look forward to reading that book as well.
Yes, it feels like an undertaking, and one thing that I'm loving about it is I'm not endeavoring to undertake it all by myself. So where igniting intimacy is a playbook, right, is that sense of yes, I'm inviting the reader into play, into exploration. This one is more of a conversation. So a lot of questions for the reader to think about, or for the readers to ask each other or to engage with together, but also conversations between me and fellow intimacy geeks of different sort of different arenas and flavors, and had a couple of those conversations so far. And what I'm loving about them is that they've all been a really manifest demonstration of the magic that happens between people when we talk to each other and when we have those brave conversations. And so if anything, they sort of, every time I have one of those conversations and when I'm transcribing it, I'm rerouted into why I want to write the book, because those are precisely the experiences that I want to sort of be seeding with the work. So yeah, that's been really exciting.
Very, very. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, I feel like we've covered a lot of deep topics here in a short space of time. So if somebody wanted to explore more, if they want to go deeper, either with you one-to-one or through your book or through an event, like what's the best way for them to stay in touch with you and your work?
Well, let's see. So the book is available in all the usual, big evil corporation places, and I'll probably give you a link for one of those. But I also really love encouraging people, if you have a local feminist or queer or alternative bookshop that you want to support, ask them to get it in for you, because that supports them, that lets them know about me. So that's, a kind of win for everyone. If you have the capacity and the money to sort of pay real world bookshop prices for the book, that's always lovely. And then you can find me at makinglovewithgod.co.uk, or you can reach out to me via rowan@makinglovewithgod.co.uk, particularly if you're interested in one-to-one work in the psychosexual coaching side of things. And what that typically looks like is usually an hour of dialogue interspersed with breath work, with structure, with whatever it feels like it might facilitate that deeper intimacy with yourself in the moment. And in terms of events, again, the website, but also worth following me on Facebook, where I am disastrously inactive, except for when I have an event. That is the first place that I'll post it. So that's at MLWGod on Facebook. So yes, those are some of the places that people can find me.
Thank you. And I will share all of those links, clickable links, with this video as well, so people can just click straight through and stay in touch. Was there anything else that you wanted to say or share before we wrap this up?
Let's see. Well, I think just that it's been delightful to spend an afternoon with you, and I'm so grateful for the excuse for the two of us to sort of sit together in our respective kind of red and pink spaces on a January afternoon and have a conversation about things that excite us. That's, yeah, just been such a pleasure and a treat. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you. And likewise, from my perspective, it's always a delight to chat with you, and I hope it's not too long before we can break free of our respective little rooms and meet up in person as well.
I recently received the gift of a dry robe, which for anyone who doesn't know is an item that helps facilitate swimming in these very cold climes. So perhaps I shall have to come and visit you, and because I know you have a nearby swimming spot that you frequent. So
yes, although I have to say I don't go in the winter, but I could be persuaded just for the thrill.
We'll wait a little bit longer.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Rowan. It's been an absolute delight. And I will share this, and yeah, look forward very much to your new writing coming forth. Thanks then. Bye for now.